Welcome to a special episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a licensed therapist, author, and mental health advocate. On today's show, we're going to be talking about politics.
Yeah.
My co-host, Doug Maillard, is both laughing and sighing and crying about a conversation that we must have, man. We must have it.
Yeah. I tell you, of all the episodes we've done, this like causes me the most stress.
Yes.
Because it's something that I have chosen to consciously disassociate from. I mean, we talked about it when we first started the show.
Yeah.
About how that was Trump had just been elected, I think, or was got, and it was our top end of the year episode. I was really stressed about it. And I made the choice then to be like, I'm not going to watch the news every day. I'm not going to allow myself to get dragged down into the mire. And now being forced to sort of confront it and know we're going to have this conversation, it's actually very stressful to me. I'm nervous about this episode.
I feel the same way. And, I've been reluctant to talk about politics on this show because it's a mental health themed podcast. And there are a lot of reasons why I felt like as a therapist, I didn't want to go too out on a ledge in terms of just like giving my opinions or feelings about things, especially things that we're so touchy about and we can be so, rail. Yes, the third rail. We can be so easily offended. And my feeling is like mental health is for everyone. And I want to invite everyone in. I don't want to alienate anyone just because, you say one thing about your value system or something you believe about our politics, and then you're put into a certain camp and then you're the enemy and then you can't really communicate anymore. And that's part of why now I want to talk about these things, because I think it's unavoidable, the effect that politics are having on our mental health and our ability to communicate in a healthy way, even in individual relationships, within families, these conversations can be so difficult, but also on a bigger scale, I see parallels between what happens within an individual and their own psyche, the turmoil that can happen when you have mental health challenges, and what's happening on a societal level in terms of the toxic extremes and compensations that happen when we disagree, and how that's led to where we're at now and how that's affecting us. And sort of like, we're not going to necessarily solve all the problems in the world in one conversation.
Spoiler. Sorry, guys. We tried.
But I think the sort of impetus for wanting to have this, because I reached out to you, I was like, look, I don't think we can avoid this anymore. I think we have to talk about politics, at least with some regularity. And we're not going to become a political show. But I'm just feeling, both as a clinician and a mental health advocate, and just hopefully a relatively well-informed citizen of this country and the world, that I want to use my voice for what I see as the change I'd like to see in the world, which is healthier communicating and having dialogues that are actually productive debates where we can disagree and respect each other and raise the awareness and education about our civic process, because we've lost that in a lot of ways. And I think that the world that we're in now, navigating social media, cable news, figures that are very intentionally trying to manipulate and distort reality, the onus is on us as citizens to have conversations that actually spur healthy debate and bring facts and reality back into the equation. Not that I'm the world's authority on all of these things, but I think I'm a relatively well-informed citizen. I think that my opinions are as valid as anyone else. And I think that you have strong feelings and opinions about this that I think are valuable. And so anyway, I think that's enough of a setup. I feel the same way that like just thinking about this, it caused me some stress and anxiety, both in terms of just like we've been avoiding it and now we're going to talk about it. And we're at such a pressure point. There's trouble in the Middle East. There's, with the immigration issues and all the things that we fear in terms of what can go wrong and turn our democracy into something that we don't recognize anymore are kind of happening right now. Yeah. So just like having to address that, it's already causing me stress not talking about it, but actually talking about it in a public way causes me stress, both in terms of like how touchy it is and how careful you kind of have to be. But also just wanting to do it justice. I don't want this to be like a lecture where I prepared and gave all my talking points on this. I want it to be a conversation and even a debate if we disagree on things. But I'm feeling the stress of like, well, you have to do it just right.
Right. Yeah.
Do you feel that?
I do, because as I've said, I've sort of disengaged, and anytime something comes up in my feed where I go, oh, I'm finding myself watching this congressional hearing and this, senator's getting eviscerated. No, I'm not going to, you know what I mean? Like, but therein lies the problem, and the reason I almost feel this is pointless. I feel like the minute we start, when someone asks a senator, straightforward, Senator, your big, beautiful bill, this budget bill that's out, is going to cut Medicaid by $70 million or something. Is that a fact? And they don't give a yes, they don't give a no. They go, Senator, you know that we as a country, and they're like, no. Is it going to cut $70 million from Medicaid? The bill clearly the fact that you talk about that civilized debate where there are disagreements. If we can't just agree on reality and facts, what is the point of sitting here trying to have decorum, following the debate, the rules of,
Right.
What's the point? I saw a video, I think it was a comedian named Ari Shafir, who, I am not advocating for this, but he was like, nope, violence. Violence is going to be the only answer. Look back through history. The French Revolution wasn't guys debating civilly. Yeah. It was they chopped off their heads. Look at the Arab Spring. Like no regime change, no major revolutions happened without violence. And he's like, I'm all for it. Let's start killing politicians. And I was like, wow. And it sounded so extreme, and it's like a hot podcast take. But then I started thinking, and I was like, we are sitting here, we being, a liberal, left-leaning kind of political mind, are sitting here going, no, we have to address the facts, we have to address people. And the right is going, la, 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 no, nope. And like the Supreme Court says we have to do this, nope. So what's the fucking point? What's the point of trying to have this debate? And they said, get out and vote. So we all got out and vote. And what happened? Nothing. Right. We lost the House. We lost the Senate. We lost the judges. We lost the president. What's the point? And that's where I go, I have to, for my own mental health, check out. Yeah. Because I feel useless. I feel helpless. I feel disenfranchised. I feel all those things. So that's why I go, I don't even want to have this conversation, because I don't see the point of it.
Well, I feel your frustration, and I think you're not alone in that. Mm-hmm. I think all of us are feeling that to a certain extent. And for our own mental health, to a certain extent, it is healthy to tune it out. Mm-hmm. That's why compartmentalization is a coping mechanism. It's like when something is too difficult, too anxiety provoking to deal with, sometimes you just have to push it out of your mind because you can't function otherwise. Right. It's just too overwhelming.
And again, I know we said we're going to try to stay away from caveats and things, but which as a white male is easy to do. Yeah. There's talks about ICE raids in our neighborhoods and stuff. And I go, well, that would suck for them, but it doesn't affect me in the same way, So I understand that, but it's still that your point is well made.
Well, here's the key thing that is really important to remember in response to the extreme sort of statement that you just quoted, is that if in opposition to the things that we detest, we become the things we detest, mm-hmm. then we've lost the battle. Because a revolution in which we now are the tyranny, then we've become the thing that we hate. And that is the end of our argument. That is the end of our moral high ground. Yeah. That is the end of our ability to actually, because here's the thing, in the history of mankind, there has been a lot of tyranny. There's been a lot of kings and dictators. That's actually the norm more than democracy is. This little American experiment that's lasted a relatively long amount of time now, but short when compared to history, mm-hmm. that's the exception. And we're not talking about fighting to create that again. Right. We're talking about fighting to save that. Mm-hmm. So in saving it, if we become the thing that is not that, then we've lost it already. Right.
But as the saying goes, history is written by the victors. 250 years ago, we were the terrorists in America who were fighting back against the British. We fought and rose up and gained our freedom. Well, if we see our freedoms being taken away and tyranny coming back and Donald Trump ignoring judicial orders and things, and we fight to take that back, how is that a bad thing? How are we suddenly, you know what I mean? Like, we're playing by their rules that they are no longer listening to the peaceful, you know what I mean?
Well, look, certainly that is a reality that I'm trying to push out of my mind is that that's a possibility, that it comes to arms in terms of like, you have no other option mm-hmm. because there's literally the U.S. military on your doorstep. Right. And how do you fight against that with words? I don't think we're there yet. I think that we have other options than civil war. I think once you ratchet it up to that point, there's no turning back.
Yeah. And I'm not calling for that. I just will say the Marines were in LA last week.
Yes.
Like they are on our front step. And when they're here, it's too late.
No, I agree.
You know what I mean?
But here's the thing. I see a lot of different factors that are playing into how we've gotten to this point and why it's so difficult right now. And obviously, when you have leaders like Trump and other people in his camp that seem to just rationalize whatever direction he goes, because it's conflicting oftentimes. He'll say one thing and everyone either says they're on board or they say, oh, he's just joking.
Right.
And we're not actually for that. We just, it speaks in hyperbole. He doesn't actually want that. And then he actually does that thing. And then they get on board with it. And they rationalize, well, like, oh yeah, that's what we wanted all along. It's like, no, you didn't. You said you wanted something else. He was just joking. Well, which is it? Is he joking? Because now he's doing it. And so, I think that when you have a situation where you have people like that in power who are lying, who are manipulating, who are gaslighting in that way, the change that I'd like to see in the world is not attacking and killing those people. I would like to see people that are breaking the law on that level in prison, for sure, but is finding ways to institute and to battle the misinformation with correct information. Yeah. I don't think we're calling it out enough. I know it's hard because like you get on CNN or MSNBC or any of the liberal sort of biased, but more fact-based channels, and you're just really screaming into the void because you're speaking to preaching to the choir. So the people who need that information most are not hearing it. But I think that we should be pressuring, for instance, the tech companies in terms of like, this is a democracy. We can demand that they have filters that tell you what is real and what is not.
Yeah.
And fact-checking is not a political thing. Journalism used to be completely void of choosing sides. It was about you check your facts and you don't print it unless it's true. That's what we've lost because the technology has sped up so fast beyond our ability to control it that we've unleashed this demon out of Pandora's box, and we haven't figured out how to put it back in. If that stays the status quo, then it's just going to get worse and worse. And we just had a recent conversation about AI and about all this stuff and why I have so much anxiety about that. I see that as the biggest accelerator, has been and will continue to be for the problems we're describing. Somebody like Trump and that whole phenomenon would not have had the ability to take hold the way that it did were it not for Twitter and Facebook and fake news, which by the way was a real thing. Fake news were Russian bots, feeding us propaganda so that we would hate each other and fight each other, both figuratively in terms of our political debate and literally, which we're starting to do now. Right. So the Russians have won in that regard. It doesn't matter whether Trump was in cahoots with them or not. He was on the same page with them in terms of what he was trying to do. Yeah. And he used that to his advantage. And so you remove that from the equation. If you don't have that level of that tool that is so powerful, disinformation. Yeah. And the different people say misinformation, disinformation. Misinformation, we all can be misinformed. Yeah. Sometimes we get wrong data. Sometimes we get data we think is right and then we're corrected later. We have better data. Disinformation is intentionally misleading people. It's propaganda, it's misleading, it's labeling things and driving home something over and over and over until it becomes reality. And that's something that cult leaders do. That's something that narcissists do, projecting your own reality, distorted reality onto other people to control them. And so that is the problem. We so easily jump to, well, everyone who votes for Trump is evil. And the opposite says the same thing about us. They say, well, if you're a liberal who believes in these progressive ideals and you're so woke or whatever, then you must be, a communist. You must be somebody who believes in a totalitarian regime. You're somebody who wants the government to be deciding every choice for you. And this agenda of wokeism it's like, no, I'm a liberal person. I don't believe in extremes like that. I believe in liberal democracy. Yeah. I believe that we all should be able to say what we want to say, even if it's some nasty shit. Like, we need to have the right to do that. Right. And so to a certain extent, it's like on the left, we've gone so far that we then are wanting to censor that of other people in terms of their ability to say things. And then we lose the moral high ground. Because we're in the right to want democracy, to want a compassionate debate in which we are able to communicate about these things and voice your opinion, even if it's unpopular. But on the right, it's like people are voting for somebody they're voting against their own best interests. A lot of times they're so gaslit and misinformed that they think they're doing the right thing. And so to judge them, being someone on the left, as being as evil as the people who are misleading them, I have an issue with that. Even though I disagree with them and I see some of the things that they vote for and the things they support as despicable, I don't think they're despicable people. I think oftentimes they have been brainwashed.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, because if we have a debate coming from the standpoint of these people are evil, there's no way we're going to communicate. There's no way we're going to change hearts and minds. And we have to come from a place of our better angels. We have to come from a place of open minds. That doesn't mean that we accept or dismiss the extent to which somebody like Trump is toxic. We have to fight that and call it out. We have to call out the things that are factually incorrect over and over and over again on a daily basis on any platform that we're able to, and find ways to demand that, the technology is more responsible.
I feel like the saturation level, we as relatively young, technologically, hip guys, we're around enough to see if a story breaks today, that by tomorrow, if it's been debunked, we get that in our feeds. We understand. The issue is when it became so pervasive in the 2016 election that grandmas in Kansas, it got through that filter of Fox News and Facebook and I read that and even if there is a correction or a retraction, it's already out there, and those people are not in the cultural flow enough to see, that thing that I believed yesterday, that Obama is I think about that woman at that debate with John McCain 20 years ago. She's like, I don't like Obama. He's a Muslim. And John McCain said, no. First of all, as if that were a terrible thing. Right. But no, he's a good man. He's a good American. We just disagree on things. And that woman was like, oh, really? To see her corrected in real time was a mind change.
Yeah.
That can't happen anymore because there isn't one-on-one interaction like that, but there also isn't a president like Donald Trump who's going to say, no, Joe Biden was a nice guy. We just disagreed. It's like I see the opposite happening where they're showing videos of Trump's military parade last week and Trump fell asleep. Be like, okay, it's a screen grab of him blinking. And I'm not going to engage in that, being like, oh, see, he's old. The fact that is the discourse, it's boiled down to who's older and more doddering, who has more fans at their parades.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, is becoming the thing that you hate.
Yeah.
That's why we have to avoid that. And I disagree with you on the idea that, correcting someone like that is going to have no effect now. That's a little too cynical even for me, because the reality is that wasn't that long ago. The technology has changed, the climate has changed, the level of disinformation has ramped up greatly, but that doesn't mean we can't correct that.
But you watch Jordan Klepper on Daily Show all the time. He goes to rallies and it corrects people right in real time. We can't indoctrinate these children with the pride flags and the hats, right? And they're like, yeah. Meanwhile, they're all wearing Trump flags and hats. They're not even getting the point. Now, I understand it's a satirical show made to show their hypocrisy, but there is an intentional obtuseness, if that's a word, of I don't care what I see. I don't care that I saw 5 million people at No Kings rallies versus 10,000 people at Trump's pathetic birthday parade. And I'm still going to say, nope, more people were at this because they just decided that it's a fact.
It's a willful ignorance. And that has been one of my pet peeves for a long time, is when people, when presented with facts and reality, just still deny it. And this is the crossover to what I wanted to talk about in terms of mental health on an individual level and how it relates to the societal level. Because I noticed this before I had an education in mental health, before I went back to school to get a degree in clinical psychology. I'm
vibrating, by the way. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm so oh.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let's take a deep breath.
Yeah.
I feel you. No, I feel the energy and I feel the frustration. And this is why we need to talk about this stuff. And we need to, to whatever extent, and the few people that watch this show, be the model of how we can talk about these things in a healthy way. And when that angst rises, what do we do about it? Because if we can't do it on an individual level, then there's no way we can do it on a societal level. And it starts with the individual. However, certain individuals have taken it to a level that is truly evil in terms of manipulating, intentionally lying, knowing that they're lying, and just without any shame doing so in order to meet their ends, to fit their agenda.
Yeah. So, I think it's like you say, it is intentional, and I believe it's the gamification of people's lives, in no different than the way ESPN used to have commentary on sports. Now it's just Michael Jordan is the greatest ever, LeBron James is a bum. Go. And that's content. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump and Steve Bannon and his whole cadre of people who literally, the same way that, 40 years ago, Reagan's people were like, well, we have this strategy where if we alienate black people and we gerrymander and we redline, we'll win. It wasn't about, I don't even want to say it wasn't about being cruel. It was just about winning, and Trump took it to the final level where it was like, it doesn't matter if what I say is true. It doesn't matter if what I say I'm going to do, I do. All that matters is that I win. And if I get enough blood boiling and I get the conversation, that he'll win. And he won. And that's why I say, what's the point of this discussion? Because facts no longer apply. Therapy, rational thought no longer applies in these conversations.
Yeah. Well, those are examples of individuals who have no value system sort of defining why they do things other than, as you said, winning. Yeah. Right. It's totally Machiavellian. It's like the ends justify the means.
Like sorry to keep interrupting, but like when Trump pointed out that he does, like when he doesn't pay contractors and people, and like he just thinks, well, that was your fault for going to business with me. That was a bad business deal by you. He thinks it's smart business and he wins.
Right.
So there's no consequence. There's no shame. There's no guilt. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what we need to fight back against. And I think the temptation is to get so frustrated by one person's actions that we then generalize. And overgeneralization, that's another cognitive distortion. Mm-hmm. Because that person is capable of that level of dishonesty and manipulation doesn't mean that all the people that he is manipulating are all bad people. Okay. And when we do that, when we get so cynical that we see that problem that you're describing, that's so frustrating, and you're like, ugh, that we then leap to a conclusion that is not necessarily reality, even though the reality of him is very present, then we've lost our perception of reality.
So do you think the cut off the head of the snake and the body dies theory would apply if Trump were gone? People would wake up and rub the cobwebs from their eyes and say, what were we thinking?
I'm glad you asked that.
J.D. Vance doesn't have the same charisma.
I do think that. And that is probably an unpopular opinion because people say the problem isn't Trump, the problem is Trumpism.
Yeah.
Now, I agree with that statement, but I don't think that a person like Trump comes along every day.
Yeah.
You see these people in history, and I wasn't there, but I assume Alexander the Great and Napoleon Bonaparte and Julius Caesar had similar kind of cult of personality. But we do know in recent, on film, we see Hitler and Mussolini, and we see cult leaders like Jim Jones and Charles Manson, what kind of grip they have on a group of people that leads them to actually believe things that are just not true, and to place all of their faith, and actually even against their own interests, to the point where they die because of it, because of this one person that has some strange magnetic pull that we look at and say, I would never fall for that. That person's crazy. Yeah. And they're clearly an insane, toxic narcissist who's just trying to control people and use people to their end. That doesn't happen every day. It happens around the world here and there, and people rise to power because of it. And I used to get in this debate with my partner, Sean, who I was with for a long time. And of course, we talked about everything over the years that we were together. We used to watch a lot of documentaries about cults. Mm-hmm. Even before I had an education about this stuff and after. And we used to have this debate over and over again because she had very little compassion for the cult members, especially ones who did bad things. Like most recently, we were watching the Nexium cult one. And, it was like, well, some of the ladies who he brought in and brainwashed went out and then started recruiting other people to do the same thing too.
Yeah.
And so they became guilty of the thing that they were brainwashed by, right?
And it's all actors. They all just wanted to be famous.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Now, I have compassion for those people because I do believe those are gullible people, highly impressionable, which we all are to a higher degree than we would like to admit. We are suggestible. If we are bombarded with information and lies, and that's the only reality we know, you start to believe it. Yeah. In the same way that, to compare it to the individual, we tell ourselves the same things over and over again, something negative, we start to believe that negative thing. What's the answer to that? You start telling yourself the positive thing, right? So like within a cult, yes, it's really hard to get someone out of that indoctrination because they've been brainwashed. They've been in that world for however many months or years, and they believe this is truth. This is reality. But all of the people in that group were not that before. They were people that were manipulated into that. They may have had their own problems. They may have had personality issues.
He was always a guy who was susceptible to suggestion, but not necessarily.
But you take that guy, Keith Raniere, out of the equation, they don't do any of those things.
Yeah.
They don't get to that point. And once you remove him, now you have to obviously deprogram all the people that he had programmed, but you cut the head off the snake and the cult isn't there anymore. And I really do think, I mean, this is maybe wishful thinking, but I don't think Don Jr. or JD Vance or even Steve Bannon are charismatic enough to lead that kind of cult of personality.
My thought is that it's impossible for multiple people to be as completely without shame. Like I feel like even these Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott and all these governors who are aping what Trump says, like I feel like there's still a part of them that when they're smiling in front of a camera and going, oh shit, they know I'm like, that there is a part of them that goes, I can't pull this off. You know what I mean? Like I have to at least apologize. Trump will never apologize.
He's not
for
burdened
anything.
by the insecurities that they have at least not in a conscious way. He's a deeply insecure guy on another level is why he's that narcissistic. But the ability to have, like you said, have no shame whatsoever. What makes a really good liar? Somebody who actually believes their own lies. You saw it with O.J. Simpson. That was the first time I think I had never encountered someone in my own life like that.
O.J.'s innocent.
Well, you hear him talk, and I remember at one point thinking, I think he really believes he didn't do it.
Yeah.
I think he actually has convinced himself he didn't do it. And if you look at like the way that people talk about him, he was always really smooth and charismatic and got people to do what he wanted. And how? Because he was so full of himself. And again, it's that denial. Something is a reality that I can't face. I'm going to block it out of my mind so much that I create another reality.
Yeah.
It becomes delusion. And I think that's what happens for Trump is that something is not convenient. It doesn't fit with his self-image. So he creates this new image that is more comfortable for him. And then as all sort of narcissistic people do, they then have to convince everyone else that that's reality too.
Yeah.
And it becomes, I used to think it was like a conscious manipulation. And to a large extent, I think with him it is. But a lot of times when people manipulate other people, it's because they need for it to be true for themselves. And so they convince themselves it's true. And I need for you to believe that it's true too. So I gaslight you because I need it become your reality too. Yeah. And so again, I don't blame the people who have been susceptible to that, especially in a society in which the technology is designed to manipulate and control people in the same way, because not for that reason. I mean, it's designed to make money just like any other business. I don't want to be so cynical to say that everyone who creates social media is evil in that way. It's just like any other business. It's the algorithm is designed to keep you on there so that they can sell you more ads and stuff like that. But for somebody who thinks in that way, and he was very astute in terms of Twitter and that type of thing, and from long before he was a politician, it's like say the lie over and over and over and over again. Never admit that you're wrong. Never admit fault. Always project what you're doing onto your enemy. The people who fell into that, they had the same kind of conditions that people in a cult do in terms of being brainwashed and being taken further and further away from the things that anchor you in a sense of what is real.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that our country is lost. I know that I can be cynical. I do think that the only way we combat this is by being part of the solution and by being the sane ones. And so what? Okay. So the other thing I wanted to make a point on. Do you have any other reaction?
It was going to lead to a question. Short of nationwide therapy where everyone gets to learn the 20-minute speech you just gave about that what's the solution? Because like you say, starting with the tech companies is a good idea, because I agree that Mark Zuckerberg 20 years ago wasn't, I'm going to mess with elections. It was whatever his fucked up social agenda was in making girls hot and whatever, as we saw in Social Network. But he was starting a business. And I wonder about the morality of, you know, we just talked about the lack of guilt and filter that Trump has. Is it possible that Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and even Joe Rogan, who we've talked about, at some, like, if this show became super popular and people started to base their opinions based on what we said, I would like to think that we would feel that weight of that responsibility and be super careful to not say, I'm just saying measles vaccine, we haven't seen it. You know what I mean? Like spreading disinformation, misinformation. I would like to think that we would rise to that occasion.
Yes.
So what is it about those tech leaders where they sold their souls for $1 billion or for $100 billion and said, I don't have any responsibility. This is just free speech, et cetera, et cetera. So it's two questions. Short of giving everybody therapy, what is that answer? And two, how did if it is only not only, but if Trump is the head of the snake, how is it infecting Elon Musk? How is it affecting Mark Zuckerberg, who 8 years ago put in fact checking and banned Donald Trump, and now this year was like, we're gonna cut back on the fact checking because it's free speech. Like, they're all selling their souls the same way because they're seeing it works.
To answer your first question, this is where I can point the finger at the left a bit here. And again, not an equivalency, because I don't see the problems on the left as equal to the problems on the right. I see, but I do see as part of the bigger equation in terms of how we got to where we're at and how we can get out of it. I feel like there's a lack of leadership on the left because oftentimes they kowtow to the loudest voices, which oftentimes are on the fringe, and they may have good ideas. They may be based in compassion.
You think that? Sorry to interrupt, but you think that?
What?
Like that they listen to the loudest voices on the fringe? Like Bernie Sanders was the loudest voice and he got fucking railroaded. The guy that's running for mayor in New York is fucking awesome and he's getting railroaded by Cuomo because that's what the establishment wants. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is and Ilhan Omar and you know, all these voices that are super fucking progressive are getting pushed to the side because the centrists are like, nope, keep status quo.
Well, what I'm saying is that you see the leaders on the left kind of blow with the wind. Oh, that's the point I was going to make about the people like Bezos and Zuckerberg too. I think they kind of blow with the wind, to answer your second question. I think you've seen it in real time. Yeah. This is like any business. It's like when everything was super woke, businesses will put out statements about supporting LGBTQ, whatever, because it benefits their business. And then the second it doesn't, they drop all of that. I think that all of those guys in those tech companies is more or less the same things happening. They're reading the tea leaves right now. Trump is in power. That's where the focus is. They're doing things for their business that's going to be consistent with that reality. If that reality changes, they're going to go to where the money is and to where the public. So I'm not really like that concerned with trying to figure out what their agenda is. It really is about capitalism at the end of the day for that. But I think that the problem with leadership, with people on the left, is that they're kind of blowing with the wind. It's like, okay, well, this week we're using, like, you see Kamala Harris up on stage saying, you know, my pronouns are she, her, and you know, supporting things like that, because that's where the agenda is on the far left in terms of making progress in that regard. And then the second, it's like, that's not popular anymore. It's like, we're going to move to what today is the talking point.
Yeah.
As opposed to, there are liberal ideals, the ideals of democracy that we need to stand on regardless of the climate today, because that is our strongest point. And it's about freedom of speech, regardless of whether it's unpopular speech. If we can't tolerate, if we become so intolerant of the intolerant that we then start canceling them and doing stuff like that, then we shoot ourselves in the foot. And you see those things happen on the fringe. And I'm not agreeing with the people that they're attacking. I'm not defending them. I'm just saying that when you become the thing that you hate, you've lost your argument. And the problem with the leadership on the left is that they'll blow with the wind to whatever climate is there, as opposed to being a rock.
Have a consistency of message.
Yes.
The way the right does.
Yes, exactly. Consistency, because what we have to stand on are the foundational bedrock principles of democracy. And if you're constantly wavering on that, then you've lost your standpoint. And the thing that's ironic about this, and the other point that I wanted to make, is that if you go far enough in either direction, left or right, you actually end up in the same place. And this is another thing that occurred to me pretty early on before I studied any of this stuff. The political spectrum is not really left and right so much as it's east and west. It's a globe.
Mm-hmm.
The spectrum bends like a horseshoe. When you go far enough to the left where you're into like extreme socialism, communism, Soviet Union type stuff, it's no longer resembling what Karl Marx talked about.
Mm-hmm.
It's now become totalitarianism and authoritarianism, where you have Stalin and other leaders like that, and you've lost your rights, and the government has ultimate power over everything, right? Mm-hmm. In the same way, if you go to the right and you're trying to fight against that, and you're calling that the enemy, so much that you become completely intolerant of anything that we call socialism, which, by the way, there are a lot of socialist programs in this country that have been there for a long time. So it's, it's not an all or nothing proposition, mm-hmm. to go back to another thought distortion. If you go so far in battling that you become a fascist, then you essentially become the same thing.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And so if you're arguing, well, we have to fight fascism with fascism, you've lost the argument.
Yeah.
And you become the thing that you hate. And so I see that happening where it's like, people move further and further. And so my argument is not, I know that when I've talked about centrism in the past or moderation, being a moderate, you've kind of laughingly said like, well, these sort of, platitudes of, mm-hmm. of centrists sort of just trying to please everyone. That's not my argument. And I understand why that's frustrating, because I used to feel the same way about the moderates when I was a little bit further up to the left as a progressive, as a young man. The argument I'm making is that the opposite of that pole that either side goes to is liberal democracy, standing on your ideals of this weird, unique thing we've been building for a couple hundred years, mm-hmm. that where you tolerate extremes. It's the only society in which we're able to do that. We tolerate the extremes. We call it out. We're able to have a debate about it. And again, this is not to say that over here is equal to this, because that's a false equivalency.
Yeah.
There's more evil going on the right. And that is the terrorist threat in our country right now. It is the thing that is threatening our democracy the most. So again, not an equivalency. But if battling that, we lose this center point of our ideals of democracy, and we go too far this way, then we lose the leg that we have to stand on.
Yeah.
So that's my argument. It's like, we used to have civics classes. I know that makes me sound like a boomer to talk about civics. We used to have an understanding that checks and balances was the reason why we're able to have a democracy.
Yeah.
No one has that much power. If on the right they're saying, well, let's just get rid of that. Let's just give one person power, because the left has become too powerful. The deep state is running things. Mm-hmm. The Clintons, the George Soros, whatever, they're using that argument. Now they've become the thing that they're saying they're fighting against.
Right.
Because they've given up the checks and balances, and they're willing to hand the keys to the kingdom to a king. And so to go back to your original thing, if you were talking about, well, then we have to become tyrants in order to fight that.
Right.
That's not the best way to fight that, because now we're just in another tyranny. Now we're in another battle in which somebody will rise in that power vacuum to be another, like in Cuba. In Cuba, they rose to fight what they saw as tyranny with this socialist revolution, which everyone supported. Che Guevara, all these people that were visionaries, who, if you look back, Marxism as an idea, if anything, was a little naive. It was a little idealistic. Mm-hmm. It was like this utopian society where everyone's going to get along, and we're not going to need strong central government because we're all just okay with being equal. And it's like, that doesn't really work with human beings. We're a little more complicated and greedy.
I believe Frank Zappa once said, communism doesn't work because people want to own things.
Yeah.
Like so.
And so what happens when you have that revolution is then someone like Castro rises, and then or Stalin rises.
But that's the flip side of the same coin of, say, the French Revolution.
Yeah.
Or
with Napoleon, who ended up taking power in that.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, and again, I maybe I came out a little hot in the beginning. I am not calling for violence.
No,
I am not calling for the overthrow. But I am pointing out that, like, it's only because we were, Castro's the enemy, the people of Cuba, who there are a lot of people who loved Castro and loved, that's a bad point. What I mean is, the victors tell the story, know, and so because Castro ended up being just another, dictator, that there wasn't a positive thing that came out of it. But there are many revolutions where there was a bad government overthrown, and now, it's like.
But again, we're not fighting to institute democracy. We're fighting to save democracy, and you don't save democracy with something other than democracy.
Yeah.
You don't save democracy with violent revolution. You save it with the democratic ideals that has kept us in a place where we have not had a dictator for 250 years.
But that is all contingent upon everyone buying into the social contract that if the Supreme Court says XYZ, we follow XYZ. Or if the voters say ABC, we follow ABC. And the right has learned, well, what if we just don't? Yeah. What if who's going to stop us? Who's going to? And the truth is, and the evidence is, no one yet.
Right. Well, you realize how much of the bedrock principles of our society and our democracy were not ever written in stone. They're just establishments that, fortunately, we've had enough people in power that have respected those institutions. It makes you realize how fragile this thing is, how easily we can lose it, but also how much, when you are guided by principles and values, how much you're able to do. For 250 years, we've been able to work together, even though it's frustrating, even though oftentimes when we compromise, we don't get everything we want. We have to settle for things less than ideal. My argument is nothing is ideal. I know that that's a little cynical, but it's better than the alternative, which is you fight for your ideal so far that you become the thing you hate.
Yeah.
It's like, the socialist movements were founded on a nice idea of fairness and equality, but it didn't end up that way. And we seem to forget the end of these stories. It's like, let's become fascists to fight the far left liberal agenda. It's like, do we not remember how that ended every other time that a fascist regime took power? It never ends well. It might be sustainable for some years or decades, but eventually it ends badly. And so, I think we just have to keep coming back to, I feel like we need more voices of moderation, more voices of sanity. And it's the same thing in terms of the individual and the society, where the answer to, when you have a problem in your mind that's brought you all the way over here to where your perception is really skewed, our first instinct is to go all the way over here and do the opposite, to overcompensate. When you're insecure, you become a narcissist. When you're anxious, you avoid everything that makes you anxious, right? But now you have another problem, and it just makes the problem worse. Yeah. The sustainable answer is to find the balance point, to find balance in your life in a way that you're able to sustain tolerating things that are uncomfortable. I'm insecure, but I can deal with it. I find ways to cope with it and to work on my self-esteem. I'm anxious, but that's something we all experience. I can cope with it. I can deal with it. I can find constructive ways to use it to my advantage as opposed to it destroying my life. On the societal level, it's the same thing. If it's gotten so bad that we're over here, the natural reaction is, fuck it, let's go over here.
Yeah.
And I understand it. I understand the frustration. I understand the impulse, but that never ends well. It always either goes to another extreme where you're in the same place in terms of one tyranny to another tyranny, or it just makes the problem worse, the problem that you're in worse, because now you just have multiple problems on top of the one problem. So again, to me, it's the balance point. It's not that's ideal, that I think that everything that's in the middle is ideal and perfect. That's not what I'm arguing. I'm just saying it's better than the alternative. We didn't know how good we had it when government was boring and slow.
That's true.
And progress took decades in order to get to the civil rights movement. We had to be patient and peacefully protest and march for decades to finally get a civil rights amendment. Like, that didn't happen in a day. It didn't happen with violence and a battle where we won. It happened with standing on the ideals of democracy, making your voice heard, and being the solution, being the change in the world that you want to see, and not becoming part of the problem.
I wonder what I don't want to say the breaking point, because that conjures up this image of the floodgates opening. But, we always talk about the things that people are willing to accept and overlook, even against their best interests. The middle class is gone. There are billionaires and there are the rest of us, and people accept that, and people they vote for that, and they, elevate and talk about gun control. We just seem to, there is an acceptance of kids dying where it's like, well, it's just one of the things we have to tolerate. Like, what is the thing that Trump is going to do, or that the right is going to do, that makes the proletariat wake up and go, holy shit, is this what we've been? Okay, that's a bridge too far. And I don't know what it is, because if it isn't kids dying, and it isn't senators being ripped from hearings and thrown in jail, and lawyers and Supreme Courts being ignored. What is the breaking point?
Well, there's not going to be a breaking point at which Trump admits that he's wrong. That's never going to happen.
No, not Trump. I'm saying the citizens of the United States, the people who go, well, grab them by the pussy. It was just locker room talk. The people who have been willing to overlook everything, what won't they overlook? What's going to be the thing?
Well, that's why, like, people like you and I have made a choice to have this conversation publicly today. Yeah. You're seeing that happen more and more. You're seeing, like, what good does a march do? Does it actually change anything? No, maybe not in that one day, those people. But when people reach their breaking point and they realize, like, we need to stand up for our ideals and we need to protect the freedoms and the democracy that we care about so much. Change can happen. It doesn't necessarily happen in a day, but it happens over time. And it takes fortitude, it takes patience, it takes peaceful resistance, because we're there. We're at the point now. Like I said, when Trump took power this time, I said, there's going to be a moment where the U.S. military is on our soil, and there's going to be a moment where they're killing people. Is that going to be too far, where the government is ordering the death of U.S. citizens? Is that going to be enough?
No, because they'll say they threw rocks at ICE.
Right.
They were protecting themselves. Florida says if someone's blocking your car in a protest, run them over, kill them. Yeah. And people are going, fuck yeah. So no, that's not going to be the moment.
Well, yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, I want to go back just for a minute to what because you mentioned several things there, and I think some of them are different conversations and arguments. And the first thing you brought up was the economics of it. And not being, an expert in economics, certainly I won't pretend to be. I think that's another scenario in which we have this all or nothing thinking. Yeah. And you said we've just tolerated, we just accepted the fact that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. I think the reason why that's the case is the same thing that I'm describing in the political debate in terms of, well, it's either socialism or it's capitalism in the purest sense. Either we live in China or we live in, the Gilded Age. Right. And it's like, neither of those things are ideal. So stop pretending like they are, whichever side of the spectrum you're on. Neither of us want that. We're both scared of the same thing. On the left, we're scared of that turning into, literally 4 people have all the wealth in the world and everyone else is starving. And they have all the power, therefore we live in, what do you call it, oligarchy.
Oligarchy, yeah.
Or the opposite. Nobody wants us to live in a society like China where the government controls all those things, and your ability to attain wealth or to move up in the world is completely subject to the power of the government. But the thing is that, again, we've never been, for the early stages where we were a capitalism that was kind of unchecked before we had regulations and stuff, we were closer to the former in terms of that oligarchy that was happening with the Gilded Age, where these robber barons were making,
Morgan,
people were making ridiculous amounts of money, and people, they just had basically slave labor, immigrants and stuff working for them that were dying every day, building the railroads and the skyscrapers and all these things. Until we realized, okay, well, this isn't ideal. This isn't the sort of American dream that we imagined. Where
and people fought back and they formed unions.
They formed unions, and we created amendments to the Constitution where we figure out ways to balance, to have more checks and balances. Because we didn't anticipate that in the original Constitution. Right. We had to find ways, and the argument in opposition to what I'm saying would say, well, that, Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal was socialism, and that's part of the problem. But the time that they harken back to as the golden age of the 1950s was a product of that, right? The fact that we built the infrastructure and we had all these programs
Public
and
works,
that was because
arts. Arts.
We were paying a high premium in terms of taxes to the government to have these programs to do that. Yeah. And it created the kind of wealth and the middle class that created the American power in the world over the next century. And so we really, in the entire time that we've been the America that we know, we've never been pure capitalism. We've been socialized capitalism, right? We've had programs of socialized. You talk about unions, you talk about other regulations. None of us want to live in a society in which we can't drink the water because it's polluted by the factory. Like, the only person saying that is somebody like Trump or somebody like him who is only thinking in terms of the bottom line this quarter, how many millions or billions of dollars you're going to make. When you just take one step down the road, play the tape forward just one little bit, you realize, maybe some regulations are necessary. Maybe not to the extreme that has become so bureaucratic that it blocks every company's ability to do anything, and then they have to ship jobs overseas. There is a balance point between these things. It's not all or nothing. We don't have to be pure capitalism with no checks and balances, or socialism where everything is controlled. We can have something in between, and we have had something in between, and it created an engine for economic growth and wealth, which we've all enjoyed in our privileged time living in this country. Yeah. So it's just the short-sightedness. What I would also like to will into existence in conversations like this is the ability to recognize that tolerating nuance, tolerating the in-between is a healthier way to see the world than jumping from one extreme to the other. Yeah. Because you don't like one thing, you have to become the opposite. And it's like, I think if you think about it rationally, if you really sit down and think about it rationally, we know that that's true.
Yeah.
But emotionally, it doesn't feel true. And that goes back to the emotional reasoning aspect of cognitive distortion. If we're just thinking, well, I feel it, therefore it's true, then we've lost the argument. So we have to keep coming back to what is reality? What is the truth? And I know that we could get in a whole other conversation about the nature of existence and the postmodern thought. And I don't want to go into whether or not truth and reality are constructs and all that. Let's just agree on the point that in order for us to have a civilized debate, in order for us to have a democracy, we have to agree on certain things. We have to agree on certain facts and certain realities. How do we go about instituting that? We have to fight for it now.
And nuance is a great word for it, because we've always seen the stories of the senators who are violent opponents on the Senate floor, and then they're best friends after. They can disagree politically. And that's the thing where I think you're right. That's a peek in behind the curtain into maybe we can connect over humanity. Because when a Republican who, because of the party line is, we have to be Second Amendment purists. If someone says to you, is it okay that these kids at this school died? And they're not allowed to say, no, that's horrible. Because horrible is equated with guns are horrible. Right. So they can't say it. The nuance is gone. It's Senator, as you know, they don't answer the question. And if we could get to a place where two things can be true. Yes. I mean, I think I've said this, I may have said this before, I've shot guns. It's awesome. It's so fun. I understand that. But you know what else is awesome? Driving 200 miles an hour. But I understand that is not safe for society, and therefore I will not drive 200 miles an hour unless I'm on a racetrack with a sanctioned professional. Right. So maybe if I'm preparing for a movie and I'm going to be a cop and I need to go to weapons training and I'm with a professional and I'm on a range, and great. I think that's cool. And if you're hunting and you're, getting food in the ark, great. But there's no need for it here in Los Angeles. There's no need for, and those both things can be true. It's not an all or nothing proposition. And if people can, if there isn't the fear of being ostracized by your party or your constituency, if you dare to say, well, I'm pro-life, but I believe in the right of being pro-choice. Well, you can't say that. Yeah. You know what I mean? We've lost the nuance.
Well, yes. And that is the biggest change that needs to happen, is our ability to tolerate nuance and to have conversations that are nuanced. And I think that the thing is that I think in general, when the political climate changes, when the social climate changes, politicians tend to go with it. Mm-hmm. Right? We were talking earlier about how, whether it's the tech billionaires and industry just wanting to appease people and therefore meet their bottom line. I still believe in this democracy. If we change the way we think about things.
You poor fool.
But look, if 60% of the public demands nuance, demands conversations that are based in fact, then our leaders will have to kowtow to that.
But that's not true, because 70% of our people believe in smart gun control, believe in the right to, it's the statistic that Los Angeles, the city itself, would be the 10th largest state. We are. Where we live right now is 70% of the country's population, but we are ruled by a farm in Iowa because land votes in the United States. You know what I mean? And so it isn't there isn't a simple equation of if 51% of the population wants X, then we get X.
That's a different question in terms of, I mean, that's the electoral college that comes into play there, which is something we could change if we are
if
able
someone
to...
had the balls to do it, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, look, it's going to take, obviously, the people who are most brainwashed and most stuck in their willfully ignorant bubbles to change.
Yeah.
That's a hard ask because they are being led by people who are maintaining that. Right?
But look no further than that 2016 election. Sorry to go back to what you were saying about people going where the wind blows. Look at the 2016 presidential debates on the Republican side. It was Cruz, and it was all these people, and all these people saying Donald Trump is Hitler. Like all these people who were anti-Trump because they wanted to win and they realized that he was this dangerous guy. Then he wins. Now they have to fall in line and be like, we love Trump. He's the best.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a political
Most people in that are just trying to hold on to power or their business waffle. Mm-hmm. They'll go wherever the tide takes them in terms of just surviving and another day, just holding their job or their business another day. I don't think that gives me hope. I think that if you look at it in terms of like, there are certain elements that are the problem. And then there are a lot of people that are just spineless and are just, trying to protect their own back.
Ted Cruz, you're a spineless weenie.
And then you have the majority of people that are either misinformed, manipulated, or scared. Mm-hmm. Just scared. I think on our side, we've been scared to offend. We've been scared to speak up. It's like you say something. That's why there was so much stress about this conversation. You say it even you say the right thing, you say it the wrong way. Yeah. People jump down your throat and then you could be canceled. So it's like, we need an uprising of a certain conversation and leaders that are a part of that conversation, where even the people that vote against their own best interests start to realize that they're voting against their own best interests. Yeah. That's the change that has to happen, because those people get manipulated and then keep those people in power. And it's until that dynamic changes, which right now there are institutions, there's technology, there are leaders in place that are maintaining that. But the only way we can fight that is with more information, with more education, with civics, with more voices saying the things that we're talking about.
A guy like Pete Buttigieg.
Yes.
Who goes into the lion's den and doesn't
love it.
And he isn't antagonistic. He isn't picking a fight. He just says, here's the fact. And when somebody hits him with a thing that isn't true, he goes, actually, here's the fact. And they go, oh, I didn't know that. Like, it's a really amazingly disarming approach.
Yes.
That Pete has.
And if we find it, look, there are reasons why Pete Buttigieg probably won't be president. I don't have to state them. Yeah. They're probably obvious. But if we find somebody who looks like Gavin Newsom and talks like Pete Buttigieg, that's the kind of leader I'm talking about. You know what I mean? And we just need more voices. Not everyone has to be the next president, but if we have more voices that are able to straddle that line, find that balance point where the left isn't so threatening anymore, where you're able to just dismiss them because you see them, it's just the woke agenda again, right. And they kowtow, and it's just this deep state talk. And it's like, no, you can't dismiss me. I'm talking about very straightforward reality. I'm giving you facts on your channel, and I'm willing to engage with you in a calm, respectful debate, and one argument at a time, one debate at a time, one conversation at a time. Bring back intelligence, bring back sanity, bring back truth.
Are we starting to see that? Did you see the interview with Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz?
That was really interesting.
What upside down, topsy-turvy world are we in where Tucker Carlson is like pushing back with facts and like,
I was trying to make sense of that. It's very strange. It was interesting because Tucker Carlson, in my estimation, has been a part of the problem for a long time. And it was hard to see for a long time, it's like, regardless of whether you think he's friends with Vladimir Putin or whatever, he's clearly pushing an agenda consistent with the Russian agenda. Again, it doesn't matter whether they're in cahoots or not. The ends are the same. Yeah. When you see a dynamic shift and turning on somebody on his own side and something like that, it's like, okay, my first thought is like, it's cynical. It's like, what is his agenda now? Yeah. What purpose is this serving personally for him? Or is he just being a little ass and he just wants to create something that goes viral? Well, he did
get fired from Fox News.
Right.
And Fox News is, as we know, sort of a state media that pushes a narrative. And maybe he is now free from that collar and can feel, and is trying to make a name for himself again to come back into the public consciousness. Like you say, the winds are blowing a different way.
But that's a perfect example, even though I'm not going to, be quick to jump to the side of Tucker Carlson, even though I was glad he pushed back on Ted Cruz.
The Bible.
At the same time, it is a perfect example of what we've been talking about in terms of like the tide can shift. And when people see that it benefits them to be on a different side of something, they will. And so once you do shift the narrative, once the narrative is something that it behooves people to be on the side of facts, then people will join them. And then the person who is, the head of the snake can be toppled.
Yeah.
It's like with Nixon, it's like they all stood behind Nixon for a long time.
Right.
Until the tide was turning. It was clear he's going down.
And all the rats jumped off the
ship.
And
then all the rats went running. There was a tipping point.
I just talked to my son about Nixon because he was watching and he was like, what was Watergate? And I was like, you really want to get into this? And I explained it really quick. And he was like, oh, he resigned? I go, yeah, that's the thing. He resigned before he could be fired. Like he was impeached and he was like, I see the writing on the wall. I need to resign. Trump will never do that.
Well, it was a different time and he may have not have been quite as, all the toxic things that Trump is, but he was pretty bad. You know what I mean?
No, I'm not defending Nixon. I'm just saying.
It was a different time. You have to obviously look at the context of that time versus the context now. And, the people that were like, well, we got through the first term of Trump. How different is the second one? I think we're seeing now, the guardrails are off to a certain extent in a way that we've never seen in history. The guardrails held to a certain extent in his first presidency.
I was proud a lot of the times in the first presidency where I was like, yeah. Like every time he'd lose a thing that he thought he was going to just win with no resistance, I was like, yeah, all right, maybe resistance works.
But again, so look, what's different? He doesn't have as many people. He has no one in his cabinet who's a check or a balance to him at all. But also the Congress is not a check or a balance. They're all in the cult now, right? They're all kowtowing to the great leader. And it's embarrassing to watch, really. But what you are talking about, in terms of Tucker Carlson or somebody else like that, you see one defector and it's like, what's going on there? Is there something in that?
Yeah.
And it's like, if all of a sudden you saw Ted Cruz, somebody you never thought defect, you saw somebody, and then you see the tea leaves are, this is not going in the direction where it's going to behoove me anymore to be Team Trump.
Yeah.
That's when we have power to get in there and do something. And that doesn't happen by doing nothing or by playing into the things that they think. When we have a protest and it's peaceful and it's wonderful and we're standing up for democracy and we're protecting U.S. citizens, people born in this country, or people who immigrated to this country and are human beings that deserve due process.
Right.
When we're standing up for that, we're being Americans. When at the very end of the day, somebody burns a car, that plays right into the other side's hands. And now they have a talking point and a way to, so that can't be the answer. The answer has to be, I know it's hard and it's you have to be so patient and you have so much fortitude, but Martin Luther King is the model. Yeah. You got to be peaceful. You got to stand on your ideals. You got to have values. That is the strongest thing.
The narrative that LA was burning was prevailing across the country. You'd get relatives saying, are you guys okay in LA? I'd be like, are you kidding? It was the most beautiful. We went to the No Kings protest with my 11-year-old son and we walked and it was beautiful and it was love and it was people. Oh boy, I'm going to cry about it. It was people singing and people believing and people, and it makes me so mad that's the narrative that was pushed, was that like, we're a war zone, and it's not just because of the brown people. It's all the same stuff. That's like, if some people could just be there in person and see what it was, maybe there would be this like, holy shit, I've been lied to. Yeah.
Yeah. That's our job, is to take them there. We need to find a way to reach across the aisle. And if we're seeing everyone as bad as Trump, we're not able to do that.
Yeah.
Trump is a problem, and all the people that are supporting, in terms of enabling him, are a problem too. But the 30% or 40% or 50% of this country who are voting for him for whatever reason, if we see them as the problem, we're not going to be able to do that. We need to see them as gettable. We need to see them as, if they knew what I know, if they were there with you at that protest and saw how beautiful it was, they would recognize that this is democracy and that this is the America that I believe in. It's not easy. It's not easy. I know that it sounds a little Pollyanna-ish to say like, this is possible, but it's like, what other option do we have? We have to believe. If we don't believe that that's possible, then we've already given up.
Well, it's the balance of, when you say reach across the aisle, what that conjures, my initial instinct is like, that conjures like, well, I just have to accept the deportations, because it's like, well, that's their agenda and we have to see. And it isn't that. You know what I mean? It's
like accepting someone you love doesn't mean tolerating everything that they do that's bad. Yeah. It doesn't mean condoning it. This can bring it back to the individual level. It's like when you're working with couples therapy, it's like, if you love someone, and let's say you use the term unconditional love, does that mean that you necessarily accept everything that they do, and you don't ask that they change certain things.
Yeah.
So it's not that, like, we have to be able to separate. This is the nuance that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Separate the people that may be making choices against their own interest from the people who are exploiting them. They're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
If we see them as the same, we don't have as many options other than revolution.
Yeah.
If we see them as human beings that may be misinformed or just thinking emotionally, they're not basing their opinions on facts, they're basing on the information they've been given, which might be faulty, then there's something we can do about that.
Yeah.
There are things we can try to do, whether it's through the technology, it's the cable news silos that we live in have divided us. And it's like, that's a capitalistic system at play. And I'm not anti-capitalist. I like socialized capitalism, as I was talking about earlier, but I do think capitalism is an engine for economic growth and part of our strength. But that's the worst of it, in terms of, it's like people are tuning in because it continues to keep them outraged and angry, and that feels powerful.
Yeah.
And it's like, we can do something about that. We can demand that these networks. I was just listening to a podcast the other day. It was what's her name from MSNBC? What's her name?
Rachel Maddow?
Not Rachel Maddow. She was on the right. She worked on the right for McCain's. Anyway, it'll come to me later. She had Jason Bateman on her podcast, who we both love.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying, I think, why don't we just have a stamp on when you turn on MSNBC or Fox News, just like when you go to a restaurant, it's like you get a grade. You have to see what, right when you walk in, A, B, or C. It's like news or opinion.
Yeah.
N or O. Because some of the shows are flat out opinion and they're presented no differently than this is journalistic news. If you can say, oh, right as I'm tuning in, this is someone's opinion, I'm either going to agree with it or I'm not. That changes things a little bit.
Yeah.
And if in that opinion you have Pete Buttigieg on Fox News talking, you realize, okay, well, now there's two opinions. Mm-hmm. And there are alternative facts.
The cynical side of me would say we have that. Well, we have a neutral, and it's called NPR and PBS,
and
both of which are being defunded by the right
Right.
because it's fact, and they don't want facts to be out there.
Yes, because that is the totalitarian regime that's taking over, and that's the kind of thing that the right needs to understand. That is the problem.
Yeah.
Wokeism is not nearly as bad as that. I know you may see it, the political correct agenda as that's taking away your rights. We're canceling you. We're telling you what you can say and what you can't say. Right. Those are just people who have loud opinions. That is not your government taking away your rights and your freedoms. The right canceling funding for fact-based, non-biased media, that is the problem. So that's the kind of information which needs to be proliferated, and any way that we can. And thank you for bringing that up, because if you and I talk about things like that and 100 other podcasts talk about it, and they talk about it and it gets so pervasive that people are talking about it on Fox News and talking about it on Joe Rogan, because that's gettable. Joe Rogan is we can say what we want about him, but he likes to stir things up.
Sure.
He likes things that are controversial. That's the sort of the capitalism of that. It's like, why is he the most popular thing? It's because people tune in to be outraged. Or whatever. And it's like, if the outrageous thing is to say the truth, and that gets people riled up, then say that. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Howard taught us all that 30 years ago. He knew. You just got to get people pissed off, and they listen longer than the people who like you.
Well, I want to wrap this up with... the emotion that I saw when you were talking about that march, correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt to me like a combination between sadness for how that got spun into something negative, but also a glimmer of hopefulness in that you saw humanity.
Of course, yeah.
You saw people really projecting the ideals of what we stand for as Americans.
It's hard for me as someone who made the conscious choice to sort of take a step back. My wife wakes up every morning, puts on CNN, and I go, why do you do that? Yeah. It just makes you mad. Yeah. And so for me, there's a part of me that feels guilty that I step back, that I'm not engaged. So there was a part of me that when I went to that rally, that protest, whatever you want to call it, that was like, okay, I'm back in the political arena, and I'm proud of that, proud of taking my son and having him have an opinion, not just go because mom and dad said he wanted to go, because he's an artist, he's an actor, he wants to see, love and progress and all those things. So there was pride there, but it was this overwhelming, like, he was worried. He was very worried, my son, because he's susceptible to, I've heard that the military's there, and then they're this, and I'm gonna go, well, buddy, some things are worth confronting a little bit of danger. I don't think the cops are going to be there in Studio City. I think we're okay. And they weren't. It was, but it was still nice to be like, damn the torpedoes, we're going and we're going to deal with it because it's important enough to risk that.
Yeah.
And so, it's a combination of sadness that people in my family would be like, are you okay? In LA, I'd be like, are you kidding? Like, haven't we learned this by now? But also pride and hope, a little bit of hope of like, there were a lot of people there and there were a lot of people in 50 other cities doing the same thing. And if it's like, if we can just get enough of a macro view and everybody will see like, wow, there were whatever it was, 10,000 people at Trump's sad little birthday parade and 5 million people, the scales might be tipping. Maybe they are. I don't know.
Well, that's okay. That's exactly the reason why I wanted to talk about this.
And I appreciate having this conversation. I feel better now at the end because I do feel like there is not that you've laid out a plan for it, but you do make me kind of take a step back and have that macro view of like, my rage is justified and my anger and my fear is justified. And certainly as a white guy in my 40s, I have a lot of privileges where I don't have to worry about being deported. I don't have to worry, but there is sort of like, there is a path through. Yeah. And if we amplify this message enough, and if enough people listen to this and pass it along and tell your friends, and please do, if you've liked what you heard today, tell people about it, because we really want to get the message out there that maybe there is a chance that we can actually do something towards some progress.
We have to hold on to hope. We have to hold on to our ideals, but not idealism. Our ideals are strong. The things that we know to be true about what is sane and what is democracy. Yeah. And so, I do feel hopefulness after having this conversation. I feel like I understand your frustration and anger better. And I understand, it's like those are the feelings that people are having on the right as well. And they're just being used in a different way. Like, whereas we're trying to say, let's take a deep breath. Let's look at this with emotional maturity. Let's look at this with sanity and clarity. They have people telling them, let's use that anger to fuel me getting elected and
I'll fix everything
and exploiting everyone. So again, I think there's hope in that. It's that those people, they may be the problem right now because they're voting in a certain way and supporting something that's not in their interest. But as people, they are not the problem. Yeah. Their leadership is the problem. And so there's hope in that. I think it helps me to realize like, maybe this is my one little way that I can do something.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I can march in 100 marches. If you have any kind of public platform, use it. Even if you're not taking a hard stance, it's just being sane, being compassionate, being somebody who lives by the values that you pretend to espouse. Right.
And the parallels to a mental health podcast, bringing it all back home. I mean, live your ideals, but not idealistic. It applies in terms of, you have to stay true to what you believe, but you also can't let despair get the best of you.
Yeah, you have to be pragmatic. You have to be realistic. That's another thing that I think we're more challenged by on the left. I think the left tends to be, if there's a fault on the left, a lot of times it's being overly idealistic and getting to that sort of utopian ideal where then it's like you seem like you're not on this planet and you shoot yourself in the foot. On the right, if anything, they become too cynical and, then they project onto us the thing that they're probably becoming guilty of. It's like they see on the left these cabals of tyranny and wanting to take away your rights and all this stuff. It's like, I think that protesteth too much. Like, I've
you're
known
literally doing that.
I've known liberal people my whole life. I think I could say even when we go wrong, there's still a base of compassion and just like wanting the world to be a better place. Even for the people who really lose the narrative, progress and working towards a better world is usually at the core of our ideals. And so if they're seeing something different than that, it's projection. And so, I think that we have to be that anchor. We have to be that projecting the fact that we have those values that are such good values.
Yeah.
They're good. They're right. They're kind. They're fair.
I thought you were going to say that I've been around liberals my whole life and I've never seen a cabal. I've never been. Where are these cabals? Yeah. Where are they forming?
That too.
I don't know.
But I think we need to be more pragmatic. It's like they're so pragmatic to the point of cynicism. It's like Machiavellian, whatever. It's like, let's face the world as it is. accept the reality and recognize what we can do and what we can't do, and do what we can do.
Yeah.
That's the best we got.
And that's what we did today.
Right?
Do what we can do.
Hopefully. So, yeah. Well, this has been, kind of a stressful,
emotionally draining.
Yeah, it is. And I invite guests on this show to have these conversations because we do want to have respectful and, compassionate debate where we hear each other out. And I invite people to comment on this in respectful ways. Please, be part of the solution. If you're somebody that disagrees with something we said, be respectful about it. And that's the kind of debate that we have in a democracy. And if you have something you agree with, agree with it, but be a part of the solution. Do it in a way that's productive. Yeah. And
we'll engage in those comments. I'll have a long conversation with you.
All right. Well, this has been a unique episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hope you will continue to tune in every Tuesday as we release new episodes. We'll see you next time right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast.